Airplanes have become so commonplace that we often forget how marvelous they are as an engineering achievement. More importantly, we're so used to the average planes that millions of people board every year that we forget that the creativity of the human mind has not spared aircraft. We've been experimenting with the weirdest, fastest, and biggest airplanes that you won't see at your average airport for quite some time. They are as different as the purposes they're meant for are. In today's video, we will take a look at some of the coolest, fastest, and most expensive airplanes to have ever been developed. Let's not waste any more time and jump right into it. The SR-71 is simply unmatched by any manned aircraft in existence in terms of performance. The jet could fly at the mind-boggling speed of 2,190 miles per hour, flying at altitudes of 85,000 feet or more. If you can't wrap your head around how fast that is, then you should know that the record for the fastest ever bullet is around 2,800 miles per hour, and many bullets move at much slower speeds, certainly lower than the speed of the Blackbird. The aircraft was originally developed during the Cold War and was meant to be a spy plane for the US, which naturally required it to be quite fast in order for it not to be shot down by anti-aircraft missiles. It seems that Lockheed, the company behind this monster, went a bit overboard and created the fastest manned aircraft to date. The Blackbird was so fast that one of the directions that a standard evasive maneuver in case it detected a SAM missile was simply to outfly the said missile. Also, the aircraft was never shot down. Out of the 12 losses, none of them were from enemy fire, but from accidents. The pilots operating it felt quite proud and jokingly always made sure to their mates that they were driving the fastest jet around. Over 100 hours of training were required so they could master the art of operating it. However, all of this raises the question, why was it retired if it was so high performance? Well, no matter how impressive an invention may be, the costs play a major part in whether it will continue to be useful. The extremely high performance of the Blackbird meant that the costs of operating it were quite high too, around $85,000 per hour in the 1980s. In addition, since the original and only purpose of the jet was for it to be a spy plane, the development of more effective spy methods like satellites rendered the Blackbird quite superfluous, especially since the spy data it collected could only be examined after it landed. Satellites, on the other hand, can transmit information immediately. As a result, the Blackbird is now only a piece of history that nonetheless serves as a reminder of humanity's impressive capacity for innovation. Now we move on to consider the story of the Airbus A380, a giant that operates in a very different field, commercial flights. The story of this famous plane begins all the way back in the 1960s with a fierce competition between Boeing and Airbus, the world's largest aircraft manufacturers. At the time, the commercial aircraft industry was still in its infancy, and manufacturers were experimenting with smaller planes meant to fly a limited number of people for short distances. However, a massive breakthrough was reached in 1968 when the now classic Boeing 747 first came on the scene. The 747 could house around 350 people and fly at 890 kilometers per hour, a speed approaching the speed of sound. This meant that, finally, a large number of people could be transported long distances at high speeds. The concept of long-haul flights was born as a commercially viable option. Naturally, the plane was a resounding success. Boeing has received around 1,500 orders for the aircraft throughout its history, and the 747 is still flying people all over the world today. This obviously grabbed the attention of Boeing's competition and Airbus's project of producing a plane even more successful than the 747 began. Airbus knew it wouldn't be easy, but presumably it still didn't predict that the project would only be completed 35 years later. In 2005, the Airbus A380 was finally produced after several unexpected delays and setbacks that many had feared would halt the project forever and turn it into a joke. However, Airbus kept going, and the A380 finally completed its first flight in 2007. The plane is mind-bogglingly massive. It's the largest passenger aircraft ever built, with 73 meters in length and an 80-meter wingspan. It can house around 575 people, and the number can increase to the astonishing estimate of 850 people if the plane is filled out entirely. As for speed, it can fly at 900 kilometers per hour, which is 85% of the speed of light. So the A380 is faster than the 747 and can house more passengers. Looking at its sheer size, you might wonder how that thing could land safely, or it could even get off the ground. However, the plane was actually very calm for passengers. It produces less than half the noise Boeing 747 does, in addition to consuming 20% less fuel. Its design also allows for an especially slow landing, which makes the experience much more comfortable for passengers. Given all of that, you would expect that the plan was a huge commercial success. Airbus invested an estimated $20 to $25 billion in the production of this plane, so it was crucial for the plane to succeed, or else Airbus would suffer crippling financial losses. But the story is actually more complicated. At first, everybody loved it. It was easy to operate, and so was pilot-friendly. Additionally, the inside of the plane was spacious, and the passenger seats were wide and comfortable, even for the economic class. Riding the A380 has been described by many as one of the most comfortable and pleasurable air travel experiences they have ever had. Nevertheless, moving on to the present day, the A380 is now considered to be a failure. Airlines are retiring the aircraft, orders have dropped, and Airbus has stopped its production. Indeed, the company will most likely never be able to recoup the $25 billion it dumped into its development. This is definitely puzzling. Why is it not a commercial success when pilots and passengers love it? The short answer is that passenger comfort is not cost-effective. Let's elaborate on that. When Airbus originally produced the plane, its main assumption was that demand for large planes would increase as the number of travelers rose. The idea is simple: transporting more people with one plane is more efficient than using multiple smaller planes to fly them in batches. With time, however, it was becoming clearer that this was a bad assumption. As things stand today, the business model followed by airlines makes it very important to fill out planes as much as possible. This is why they always overbook flights. They take into consideration the possibility that many people end up canceling their flights, and it's easier to deal with the problem of insufficient seats for passengers than to handle the losses they would suffer from flying planes with too many empty seats. Statistically, because of the large capacity of the A380, it's more difficult to fly it at around 90% capacity, which is why airlines often opt for smaller planes. It also doesn't help that a plane of its size requires a lot of engines that aren't very efficient when it comes to fuel consumption. Finally, with climate change regulations being a pressing concern, smaller planes that are more environment-friendly are also overall better than very large ones. The overall lesson here is that bigger doesn't always mean better, and it definitely doesn't necessarily mean cost-effective. This is a good segue into our next story: sky cruises. When thinking about the future of air travel, a lot of people might picture a plane much larger than any aircraft we have today. The imagined plane would probably have hotels and restaurants too. This isn't a new dream. People have dreamt of flying hotels since the invention of airships in the early 20th century. We've also already seen how the Airbus A380 was originally meant to have restaurants and bars, for example. What's new, however, is that a year ago, the New York Post published an article about the announcement of a new airplane mega project that would bring our dreams into reality. The article claimed the airplane would be able to hold up to 5,000 passengers. It would feature 20 engines powered by nuclear engines, in addition to many restaurants, hotels, and so on. Basically, it would be a cruise ship in the sky. More importantly, the article claimed the project was set to be completed in 10 years. So, is the sky cruise idea really within reach? Unfortunately, the whole thing turned out to be fake. The project was never announced. It was just a fancy 3D model posted on Reddit to showcase the cool concept of an air cruise, nothing more. It's strange how a newspaper like the New York Post made such a mistake, but this probably speaks to how many people are under the impression that a project of such a scale is really possible when it really isn't. First, the fuel consumption of such an airplane would be beyond belief. Despite what many might think, nuclear power is still in its infancy and is confined only to a few hundred nuclear plants scattered all over the world. Powering an airplane with nuclear energy is still beyond our reach. And just imagine what would happen in the case of an accident. One thing that would definitely be worse than Chernobyl is a second Chernobyl flying across the sky over people's houses. The plane would need to be powered with traditional fuel, which isn't particularly good for the planet right now, as you probably know. It would also be bad for business from the point of view of airlines, given the obvious operating costs. It's also difficult to see how such an airplane would fit the airline business model we've seen. More restaurants and hotels means less area for passengers. To compensate for this, the tickets would have to be crazy expensive, and even then, they still wouldn't be likely to cover the tens or even hundreds of billions that would go into such a project. The future of commercial air travel seems to be headed towards more efficient and cost-effective planes, rather than unfeasible projects that only seem cool in theory. Well, that's it for today's video. Which of these projects did you find the most fascinating? Do you know of any other crazy airplane mega projects? Please let us know what you think in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. See you in the next video.